Dear friends, I'm glad to welcome you on Figin Live channel. It is November 5th, Saturday, 9 p.m. in Kiev, 10 p.m. in Moscow. We begin our day of streams. We have two streams today. In an hour we'll have a stream with Alexey Arestovich, as we usually do, and the first stream we called it the red button on the red line. And our guest today is a scientist, physicist, doctor of math and physics, Vladimir Marakhonov. Vladimir, hello. Hello, Mark. Certainly, we will talk about the current situation, and I spoke about this stream for quite a while. Last weekend we discussed these issues with our other experts, and I think it is the time to professionally discuss the situation that we witness. Of course, it has a socio-political level, but we are also interested in some professional details that have to do with nuclear safety and security, threat of using nuclear weapons, and possible consequences of the rhetoric of blackmail and sometimes of creating an artificial situation of possibility to develop a nuclear conflict with Russia's participation in it. And all that is related to the war in Ukraine. There are lots of speculations on that. Where is real information, where is true information, what Russian leadership can do and cannot do in terms of the nuclear conflict and ensuring nuclear security. We would like to talk to you about all these issues. And for starters, in your view, how do you evaluate nuclear safety and security on the global level and on the level of Russia? Just give us a general picture. In fact, about 4 weeks ago, a period started that will be seriously studied by historians in the future. I have to say that during that period we were just one step away from a total nuclear war, and it's not just my opinion. This opinion is shared by some serious experts, and those experts who thoroughly studied the Cuban Missile Crisis. And one of those people told me that the degree of danger today was much higher than 60 years ago when Khrushchev sent Soviet missiles to Cuba. Statements of our officials made us believe that a tactical nuclear strike is possible on the Russian side. I don't want to talk about the preparation of that strike because there are lots of unclear things, but I have to say the tension was growing, and not so many people thought, in fact, that this game is played not just by one side. There are two sides in this game, and nobody thought about what can be the response of other side, and that response could be so concrete that God forbid. Now, thankfully, the tension decreased, and two interesting documents popped up. On the 26th of October in Российская газета newspaper, there was an article that was called "A Nuclear Factor in Ukrainian Conflict," and then on November 2nd there was a statement of Foreign Ministry that was called "Prevention of Nuclear Strike," and it was stated there that Russia is not planning a tactical nuclear strike. And yesterday, during negotiations between Olaf Scholz and Xi Jinping said that international community should stand against Russia's use of nuclear weapons. And it's very important in our case, and I will tell you more about it later. Those who are interested, I suggest that you would read the report of IMEMO, this Institute of Global Economy and International Relations. This is a very serious organization. Its head was Evgeny Primakov before he became the head of foreign intelligence. This is a very interesting report. What's important that the content of these documents, especially the report of Imomo, that could be put into few bullets. One of them, our leaders sometimes say stupid things. Second one, you misunderstood them, they meant a different thing. And the third one, probably the most important one, it's said that we are nice and fluffy and we're not planning to do anything bad. About the leaders, one remark. For some reason, they take Dmitry Medvedev's statements as if it's something funny or tragicomic, but I have to remind you that Medvedev is a very important official. He is the deputy chairman of Russian Security Council, and that is, the council is chaired by Putin himself. Europeans and Americans, they look at things quite bluntly and plainly. For them, Medvedev is the second important person in the hierarchy, and Medvedev is higher in ranking than Nikolai Patrushev, who is just a secretary of the Security Council. And if Medvedev said something bad, and the next day Российская Gazeta newspaper did not report about his resignation due to some long illness, in the West, they consider those statements as official position of Russian leadership. We have 32,000 viewers, more than 6,000 people liked our stream. Thank you for joining our stream. And of course, please share the link to this stream in your social media. Subscribe for the channel. It's important that more people get our notifications. And we'll go on. Here's a question. In your view, what is the state of nuclear forces in Russia? How capable they are in terms of using tactical nuclear weapons, if we are not taking into account the response of the United States or response of United States allies. For example, if Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons, how real is Russian technical capability, professional training of the specialists, the nuclear tests that Russia does it help to keep it in shape? Like with the second best army in the world, now we see that it's not. There are lots of problems, corruption and technological problems. What about nuclear weapons? Actually, looking at the army, people can extrapolate it on the nuclear forces as well, and we can see what it is and how it impacts the defense industry too. Is it as bad as in the army, or there is something that presents certain danger? Well, first of all, we won't know that until it is used, the same as we didn't before the army invaded Ukraine. But to expect that things are so rotten and corrupted, I don't think we should hope for that. About the missiles of intermediate and short range that can reach Europe, all these missiles, they're of a double purpose. They're universal, they can be equipped with a conventional warhead or a nuclear warhead. And I think it is quite possible, and they can do a lot of harm in Europe. A more interesting situation with the strategic ballistic missiles, the missiles that can reach the United States. This is what it is. The missiles that can reach Europe, they have enough of those missiles, sufficient numbers of them, but the missiles that can reach the United States, there are certain difficulties with them, and these difficulties are because of certain reasons, and let me explain. And these reasons have to do with Ukraine and with the war. Let's go 7 years back. 2014. This is when the war with Ukraine began and Crimea was annexed. Knowing Russian defense industry structure pretty well, I was actually horrified. Looking at what's going on, I wrote an article and I sent this article to Novaya Gazeta newspaper, and the article was called Which of Us is for Strong Russia? And Dmitry Muratov, editor-in-chief, he published this article almost on the next day on their website, and the article was read by more than 100,000 people according to the internet calendar. And in this article, I tried to address those people who are pro-Crimea annexation. And I said to them that what's happening actually makes Russia weaker, and if they're really for strong Russia, they have to resist what's going on. And analyzing the structure of defense industry of the Soviet Union, I looked at what danger can be for Russian nuclear triad if Russia breaks up with Ukraine. There were such important enterprises like Yuzhnoye Design Bureau, this is Yangel Design Bureau, and Yuzhmash plant. This is where the most powerful Soviet missiles were produced. This is Satan missiles. And I made a conclusion that more than 50% of Russian nuclear triad could be endangered. And the second part of the article, I tried to explain to the people who think that Russia constantly fighting with evil American imperialists that if it's so, then by waging the war with Ukraine, Russia gives America some great opportunities to build a quite firm base right in front of Russia. But I have to make one remark. I don't share this mythology that Americans are guilty of everything in Russia, of all troubles, and that they broke the Soviet Union, because in 1990s for Americans, collapse of the Soviet Union, that was the worst nightmare. And back then they had more warheads than today by many folds, and President Bush used to come to Ukraine asking Ukrainians not to break Soviet Union, not to destroy Soviet Union. And let's see what we have today, and that I predicted in the article. By making Ukraine Russia's enemy and expanding NATO to Finland and Sweden, our government actually proved my assumption. And sadly, by 2022, it was clear that the danger for Russian nuclear triad is also justified. And I have to clarify on this one. Let's start from a file a little bit. In 1990, when Russian defense industry was in a very serious crisis, and the crisis continued for quite a while, and all Soviet manufacturing industry was just one big defense industry with small patches of civil production. Nobody was thinking about economy. Those enterprises were absolutely unprofitable, and in order to switch to new economic conditions, something must be done with those enterprises, and it was very difficult to do. I still remember that feeling of despair when haunted you when you walk through these huge workshops with high ceilings, and it was very difficult to heat them. It cost millions to heat them, and I knew that nothing could be done to this. And Andrei Nechayev, the former Minister of Economy back then, he told us when he was driving together with the director of a tank plant somewhere in Urals through the forest, and there in clearings there were hundreds of tanks that were moved from Germany, from Eastern Germany, and there thousands of them, and the director was asking Nechayev to give him more funds to build more tanks, and Nechayev was thinking to himself that you should be executed if the plant will be producing something that nobody needs. And of course it was just a metaphor, but he knew that the director is doing something in asking for funds to provide salary for his workers. And the lack of funding caused loss of personnel. Young people left, middle-aged people left who had to feed their families. They started selling things, they went in trade. More or less, expert enterprises were doing okay, but intermediaries were making money in those enterprises. And only those employees stayed in those plants. They were like 60 and 70 years old people. And when in 2000 they started funding the industry, there was an issue of generation gap. Under the normal circumstances, young people, when they come to a research institute, they learn not from these 60 and 70 years old people. They learn from those who are a couple of years older than they are. They learn how to tune up a laser, how to build a microchip, and this is how the rotation goes, and this is how they train on the job. So, but this was not there at all. It was lacking, and it was losing the professional level and the quality of education. And after 2000, there was a change in the management of those enterprises. Very efficient managers came, so-called, and they were very greedy, and they were basically destroying those enterprises. It was easier for them to steal classified money, classified funds for classified projects. They were promoting such projects, very costly projects, who nobody needed, like one of those to send a nuclear reactor to the space, or like other things. And there is also an important point here. Remember this "For want of a nail" poem. For want of a nail, the shoe was lost for want of a shoe. The horse was lost for want of a horse. The rider was lost for want of a rider. The message was lost for want of a message. The battle was lost for want of a battle. The kingdom was lost, and all for the want of a horseshoe nail. And this is our nail. We have like millions of such nails that were gone. Any complex production requires a lot of supplies, but it's like in that anecdote, a joke, camel, why you have a crooked back? Everything is crooked in me, nothing is straight. We always missed something, we always lacked something, like a membrane with a fuel filter or something like that, let alone chips and microcircuits. Well, our defense industry is not competitive enough. But let's look what was happening with Satan missile and what was happening with the guidance system of that missile. And that guidance system was done by the Ukrainian defense industry. There was a Ni-692, now it's called Khartron in Kharkiv. This is Stiletto missile. This is the second most powerful missile, liquid propellant missile. 36M2 missile Satan carries 10 warheads. Actually, the most powerful one. It has 40 decoy aids and stay on station for more than 40 years. And the warranty for them is 10 years. And 4 times that warranty was extended. And when the warranty is extended, the responsibility on the designer. And the designer is the Ukrainian Design Bureau. In 2014, this design bureau was removed. Before 2014, it was regularly maintaining the missiles, and as you understand, no matter what's happening in Ukraine, but those two defense industries, Ukrainian and Russian, they were cooperating. But after 2014, naturally, the maintenance of those missiles was assigned to a Russian organization that was given to Makeyev Design Bureau, and they were developing sea-based missiles. They had no experience working with land-based missiles, big one. And as a result, I think the probability of a failure during the launch increased. It's an ampullized missile. It is stationed. It is filled with fuel and with oxidizer. And the fuel is unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine. And they have dinitrogen tetroxide. These are two very active substances. And when They're filled in the tanks, they may corrode the tanks, and the walls of the tanks are very thin because the missile has to be very light. But of course, it's all protected. The missile is immobilized and it can be equipped like that for quite a while, but not endlessly. So that's why there is a danger that the missile, for example, during the motor launch, because of the G loads, something may be broken because it was corroded by tetroxide, and the missile might not fly anymore. So exponentially, this probability increases. Stiletto missile, the same thing. The guidance system was designed in Ukraine, and as you understand that when you know the design, guidance design of the missile, then you can build quite effective means against these missiles. So all these documents on the most powerful strategic missiles were in American hands after 2014. Sometimes people tell me, well, they had those documents even before 2014. But it's not true. It's not necessarily so. Because again, Ukrainian and Russian defense industries, they were closely cooperating. And recently you probably heard that Boguslavsky, director of the engine production plant, they were supplying Russia with combat helicopter engines. And before, they were supplying engines for H-55 missiles. This is a cruise missile that also carries a warhead. They are carried by strategic bombers. But I think this production was moved somewhere to Omsk in Russia. And now, after 2014, after this war began, I'm almost sure that all these documents are in the hands of the Americans. And if Americans have these documents, they know all the vulnerabilities of the missiles. They can calculate those weaknesses. What I can tell you, for example, they have dimethylhydrazine and tetroxide in the tanks. There is a system of immobilization, and the missile is armed for quite a while, can station like that. It's protected from corrosion from the outside. There is external and internal immobilization for the missile, and of course that has different layers of protection. But how this protection works, so what the thickness of the walls of the tank and what it's made of, I can suppose that it's made from some sort of aluminum-lithium alloy. That's just my guesses. And if Americans have all these documents in full, then they know everything. They know the material that the tank is made of. They know the speed of reaction, the reaction of how tetroxide will react on dimethylhydrazine. And due to that, they can design more efficient means against those missiles, and maybe they have them already. And these different missiles of sea-based and land-based missiles. Now we're talking about land-based missiles. With sea-based, it's a different story. Okay, land-based. So those missiles might not reach the United States, right? They may not even take off. They can be popped out of the silo with the motor launch. Satan missile. It has the motor launch, and it has powder pressure tanks. Pop the missile out of the silo, then the booster kicks in, and the sabot snaps off. And at that point, if, roughly speaking, dimethylhydrazine aids through the tank wall, and because of all the G loads during the launch, dimethylhydrazine, when it's mixed with tetroxide, they self-ignite. All this can just explode right at the launch, or may not. Well, this probability, explode or not to explode, that's interesting. Well, Americans can calculate it more precisely if they know exactly what is in the design documents of this missile. And of course, I can only guess, like in that joke, whether it explodes or not. 61,000 people are watching us. More than 13,000 liked our stream. We're 24 minutes on air. So please don't forget, share the link so that more people see it. All right then. Since 24th of February, when things started moving, we've heard a lot of different statements of Russian leadership and the response of the United States. And sometimes when Russians were saying they're going to use nuclear weapons, sometimes they were saying it kind of rhetorically or like blackmailing. Can we say that the change of Americans' response looks now that they are less afraid of these threats, that Jake Sullivan's statement, when he said on CNN, his national security advisor, he said, and he said it was a private communication with Patrushev, they communicated what's going to happen if tactical nuclear weapons are used in Ukraine. What will be the response? So and we kind of ran this distance for 8 months, going from, God forbid, to irritate Moscow when Putin, at the beginning of the military operation, when he said, don't even dare to get involved in this because we have all the means to respond. And now it's a completely different situation. Now Americans say, we can respond to you. And they communicated it to Russia. Does it mean that Americans now know what's going on? They kind of inspected all the intel they have, they studied all the documents they have, and now they know that things are not as rosy as the Russians might have thought. With decision-making process and with the technical state of the military equipment and all that. Is it right? Are we right to make this conclusion? I think we are right when we say that. But let me go on about the missiles, and then I will summarize. As we stated, the documents on these two most powerful missiles that have 40 warheads, 40% of the warheads of Russia. These documents are in American hands. Russian leadership, they knew that it's bad, and they decided to replace Satan, and they started designing Sarmat missile, liquid propellant missile. But for some reason they gave it to Makeyev Design Bureau that actually designs sea-based missiles, because before they assigned maintenance of those missiles to this bureau. But I think that that was a mistaken decision. And as a result, the launch of this missile was in 2022 in April, when the special military operation was in full swing. The launch was announced successful, but in order to station the missile, it has to have 10 successful tests when all the systems are are tested. And with the heavy missiles, Russia now, and it's clear right now that Russia now in the period of rearmament, when the old weapons are outdated, but they didn't finish designing new ones, and replacement is not finished yet. Usually in such a situation, reasonable governments stay put and don't do anything. And I think Americans 24/7, they were studying all the situation, and finally they got to the conclusion that you just mentioned. And I will tell you more. When we talk about national security strategy that was presented by President Biden, it's an important document, and there are some interesting points in this document regarding this issue. With the heavy missiles, this is the situation we have. This is a period of rearmament, and the strategic Air Force, as part of the nuclear triad, we can also exclude from consideration, because missile H-55 and H-102, these are new cruise missiles. Their range is 2,500 for H-55 and 5,500 kilometers for H-102. And they're carried on two 95M and White Swan 2-160. But before they get to the launch point, they have to fly quite a while, this aircraft, and they can be detected on the radar. So it's very easy to intercept them before they actually get to the launch point. And there is a third part of triad. These are the submarine-launched ballistic missiles. This is part of the nuclear triad that most developed in the United States, and they did quite reasonably. Most of their nuclear warheads they placed on the missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles that are stationed in Ahaya submarines. 24 missiles on Ahaya submarine with a simultaneous launch capability. We had a similar project. We tried to respond to Trident II. It was the project that's called R-39 UTTH Bark with the Typhoon class submarines. McCabe Bureau was producing those missiles, mostly liquid propellant missiles, underwater deployment missiles, but this project in 1999 was aborted, but then for some reason they placed the order for Bulava missiles in Solomonov Bureau. This missile, Bulava or Mace, wasn't actually flying as designed. Now it's already stationed, but it still flies oddly. And for this missile, they had Borei-class submarines. But the rest of the missiles, they're older. The liquid propellant missiles, the Sineva and Liner, they fly, but they have so-called wet launch. They're quite detectable, and let me explain. There is wet launch and dry launch. Dry launch, this is a motor launch, when the missile is popped up from the silo to the water, and then it pops out of the water and the booster kicks in. But the liquid propellant missile, it's more gentle. It can be popped up just like that, because the hydraulic impact may destroy propellant lines. So that's why to launch such missiles as Sineva and Liner, the silo is filled with water. And when it is filled with water, it makes noise. And if the submarine was tracked, then sonar operators of the opponent may detect the submarine, and naturally, after the detection, the submarine will be attacked. That's why with the third part of the nuclear triad, roughly speaking, we don't have an edge against Americans. And what about the anti-missile systems in the States? Sometimes people say that it's quite a complex system, and Moscow is covered in Russia, and Washington DC is covered in the United States. These are systems that cannot cover big territories. It is true if they attack warheads that are already in the atmosphere. But if warheads are on the hypersonic 20 Machs in atmosphere, clearly it's too late to do anything with them. But right now, there is anti-missile systems that operate, and the missile is most vulnerable at the boost phase, when it flies completely unprotected with the infrared signature, a very bright one. It cannot be covered by anything, no infrared decoys. And when the missile is on the post-boost phase, it can be attacked, it can be intercepted and destroy all the warheads. And then when the warheads are flying in the atmosphere, they can be intercepted. Americans have Aegis missile defense system. They have interceptor missiles SM-3 Block 2 and Block 2B. They work both in the boost phase and the post-boost phase. And there is a GMD system with silos, and they also work in the exatmospheric phase. And the THAAD system, this is a mobile system. It works like an Iron Dome in Israel. They work in the atmosphere. So modern American anti-missile systems, they can effectively intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles at all phases, maybe less effective on the last phase. See, the Chinese that have a different doctrine, they have a doctrine of minimal response. I don't remember the exact name of it. They have little missiles, but they think they have to have enough missiles so that just one can reach the United States and make some damage there when the United States wouldn't be attacking them. And they always complain that Americans, they deployed Aegis missile system. They have 3 layers of that system, and this Aegis system, what it does, it actually nullifies the effectiveness of Chinese missiles. And Chinese are kind of, don't do it, Americans. It's kind of wrong. So Aegis systems, they work quite effectively, and that decreases the probability that Russian missiles can reach American territory. And if we bring together all the factors that we have and we analyze different outcomes of it, take into account flight time, response time. In case of the total nuclear war, there is quite high probability of the following outcome: that Russian military infrastructure will be completely destroyed. All civil facilities will be significantly ruined. European military infrastructure and civil facilities will be significantly destroyed. But destruction of American military infrastructure and American territory will not be critical. And the situation of guaranteed mutual destruction that's been kept, that kept countries from the nuclear war for quite a while, does not exist anymore. But here I would like to pause, exhale, and say that I don't want to assume too much. All these conclusions are made by me only based on the open sources, public sources. I don't know national secrets, and if I knew, I wouldn't tell. So all these conclusions are probable. I cannot argue that firmly. But Americans know much more because they have many more capabilities, and they know thousand-folds more than I do, and they have all the documents on the missiles. And if my conclusions are right, then Americans know about it for sure. And then, if they make a decision to start nuclear war, and it's not going to be based on the doctrine of guaranteed mutual destruction, but understanding to win the nuclear war. Do you understand what I'm talking about, right? They will never begin at first. They're not going to set up their European allies. Well, clearly, they're not going to do that. And if even one missile breaks through the M36 missile, R-36 missiles with the 10 warheads, and it can damage the country significantly, and the voters will never forgive the party for that happening. But if Russian leadership will be throwing all the threats of use of nuclear weapons, actually, I don't know what's going to happen. In America, they may make the decision, let's cut it without waiting for peritonitis to happen, right? So that's what may happen. But I can't speak for Americans. I asked one of my friends who has good connections among American political scientists. I'll ask him to ask a question, is it possible or not? And I got an answer that it cannot be, because it cannot be ever. If even Russians make a nuclear strike, Americans are not going to respond massively with the nuclear weapons. They may gradually increase their response. But these are talks, and just talks, until it began. As soon as they start shooting back and forth, the bullet will find a hole, as they say. That's why if I were our leadership, so I would stop this dancing on the brink of the abyss. Well, maybe in defense industry or in the Kremlin, they should understand something from the analysis that you offered, and based on their own sources, I mean in the Kremlin, and maybe they get this information. And from time to time, in the Kremlin, they kind of maneuver. They say things, or they say things through propagandists or through Medvedev, and they say that they're going to use tactical nuclear weapons, and they cautiously find a ways how they're going to do that. They say it's going to be a demonstrative strike. We'll do it in the basin of the Black Sea. We just show how ready we are. That on that island, the Snake Island or Zmina Island. Yes. So we'll just make a small nuclear explosion, like 1 kiloton, that will show how prepared Russia is, and Russia is not going to lose in the war. And there is another way of doing it. Russia may say, so we can resume nuclear tests, and we can resume them on the new land in the north. And it may produce this demonstrative effect. It will impress others, and they may think that this is kind of a safe way to show how ready they are. So what actually keeps them from real combat use of nuclear weapons? I mean, use it against Europe or against Americans, or they're just trying to get to the negotiation table. They're trying to force Ukraine to get at the negotiation table by threatening with nuclear weapons. So what looks less dangerous for them? Because the response that you're talking about, that Americans may make under certain circumstances, is possible. For example, will they resume the nuclear tests, and they say we refuse to follow the moratorium that we signed, and maybe they're not talking about the full-fledged war. They're just kind of playing these little tricks. Probably you're talking about aerial nuclear tests, because underground nuclear tests are possible to do. They are not banned. As far as I know from different sources, and these sources are kind of special propaganda sources. I don't know if it's true or not, but I know that they say that recently such nuclear tests, underground tests, were done. And they said they were not successful enough. But again, I don't know, it's just rumors. Okay, if even they started aerial tests, so what else? Like, what they're going to achieve? But you're not going to impress others. But you probably impress others, and they may think that you're an idiot. Tactical nuclear strike. This is a demonstration of kamikaze's decisiveness, so to speak. It's like you're saying, okay, fine, you drove me nuts, so I'm pushing the button. And here the consequences can be quite serious, but all these dances with the tests, I don't think it's serious. And there is another nuance when we talk about Americans, how their approach changed over the 8 months. Another point is very important to mention. On October 12th, President Biden presented this document that's called National Security Strategy of the United States. It is a very important document. And this document has two parts, the public one and the classified one. Of course, nobody looked at the classified one, only except for those who have access to it. And this is a strategy that the United States will be following till the end of President Biden's term, at least. And in this document, the only opponent of the United States in the global politics, in economy, and in military, this is China. The only opponent. Russia is mentioned as a dangerous and irritating subject that is waging a bloody war against Ukraine, but as an opponent, even in the military industry, Russia is not considered as an opponent. And it brings me to some sad thinking. And it has to do with the following. Well, first of all, with the number of warheads, Russia and the United States, they have a parity. The number of warheads is about 5,500 warheads. It's a maximum according to New START treaty. And this number exceeds the number of nuclear heads in China by tenfolds. They have about 350 or about 400 nuclear heads in China. And yet, China is trying to actively develop their nuclear triad, but against the United States, China is very weak. Dunfan missiles, Dunfan 5. This is a liquid propellant missiles. They have certain issues. They are replaced with solid propellant missiles at Dunfan 41. Missile Zuila, 24 series. This is a submarine-launched missile, and they have issues similar to what Russians have with Bulava missile. So China, in terms of nuclear weapons, is quite weak against the United States, and now it's kind of balancing between the United States and Russia. But on the other hand, in this document, National Security Strategy, Russia's role is completely removed as the United States opponent. And I'm thinking that maybe Americans know something that we don't know. See, since we're discussing that maybe there is something in it. Maybe things are too bad. Because the whole thing looks strange. It looks like Russia does not present a threat that can be dealt with. But in fact, if we look at the numbers that show us the nuclear capability of both countries, and there are only two countries that can oppose each other. This is the United States and Russia. Given the number of the missiles and the number of warheads. And then it's a mystery why Russia is not mentioned in the strategy. And there is another point that is not pleasant either. China is balancing between Russia and the United States, and if Russia is excluded from the game, then China, given the Aegis missile system, China cannot oppose the United States at all. But it doesn't mean that the nuclear war will be immediately started. But it means that China will have a weaker position during negotiations, and then Xi Jinping himself can invite Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan and offer her his personal jet. But actually we can see how China softened, and Xi Jinping spoke about it right after the 20th Congress in China, and he said that we want to make an agreement with the United States, and they will be talking about this during G20 on Bali. Yes, they are going to do that. But during yesterday's negotiations with Olaf Scholz, Xi Jinping, he said that international community has to stand against Russia's threat of using nuclear weapons. Basically saying, let Russia be a player in the game. It's very interesting, yes, right. See, it's quite an interesting layout. And then another interesting point. If Russia is excluded from the game, there is another point that people don't quite notice. This is a very important strategic area. This is energy supply, and China is supplied with gas, 3 pipelines from Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. The second one, this is Sila Sibiri, Power of Siberia, 38 billion cubic meters, and then Myanmar, 12 billion cubic meters, and then LNG, and Australia was the biggest supplier of that. Turkmenia, 31 billion cubic meters, and on the third place, this is Russia, with 16 billion cubic meters. But the capacity of the pipeline is 38 billion cubic meters, and LNG in China, this is Australia, and the biggest supply of LNG, this is the United States. So if Russia is out of the game, then chances of the United States to organize a gas isolation of China, they can do that. And I don't think that those arguments would be the decisive arguments if the United States decide to respond to Russia's nuclear threat. But they can be used against Russia. So in other words, Russia should be more cautious playing these games. So we've been on air for 53 minutes. Even more than that. Soon we'll have our next stream. I would like to thank Vladimir, for joining us. We just started this conversation. Maybe we will have it in a similar format. Maybe we'll invite other specialists. And it would be great to speak about it in more detail. The topic is still quite hot, at least while the war in Ukraine is going and the threat remains. Is it higher or lower? We don't know, so we'll see. So I thank all the viewers. We have 48,000 viewers, 26,000 like this stream, so please share the links to this stream and subscribe for the channel. In 6 minutes we will have our stream with Alexey Aristovich as usual. And now a small break. Vladimir, thank you very much. Thank you, Mark.